you mentioned that for a lot of Americans under 50 especially, that the excessive levels of debt are going to be very dangerous. You said you want your daughter to grow up in a prosperous world. I'm obviously, like you said, younger, closer in age to your daughter.
Yes, and I'm not resentful at all of your youth and your future. So,
and I think for a lot of younger people in my generation, one of the big issues in the future is climate change. Mm-hmm. And do you think there's a way for us to deal with the climate crisis while also dealing with this debt, or are we going to have to pick one or the other?
And one of the most frustrating things I have, and sorry, with a lot of young, but also on the left, is when there's disruptive technology that is amazing and actually provides a path to really deal with, if you're someone who embraces certain climate change models, actually shows a path of a solution. If it's not part of either their folklore or who writes them checks, it's not embraced. I did actually a floor presentation a couple weeks ago showing that there's a new breakthrough on something that's very, very cheap, very, very simple. It was actually a type of altered clay. It's functionally a kitty litter that apparently has this amazing absorption of methane. It would be a dramatically less expensive way to go and capture methane. Methane is a 9-to-1 ratio, though it has a slightly different half-life than we used to believe. We now know how to do ambient carbon mining at prices that we never thought possible. There are technologies that are disrupting. So if climate change is what drives your political view, your soul, get much more creative on the technology. Instead, you have this sort of Malthusian movement, particularly on the environmental left, that says, well, we should live poorer and live less. And there's those of us who are incredibly optimistic of, the MIT technology from a couple of years ago, where they found a way to do ambient carbon capture at a fraction of the current cost. Grab those, push those, move those forward, and you actually see there is a solution where both the right and the left can get to the same point they want without bankrupting your generation.
And some of those are sort of what you said about reforming the tax code. There's 45Q in the tax code, which is...
I'm the sponsor of.
So something like that, which is set to expire at the end of 2023. And then an extension for that, as well as Section 48, was part of Build Back Better, and is something that more moderate Democratic senators have said that they would support climate legislation. Do you think there is an opportunity, at least of that part, to have some sort of bipartisan agreement?
The answer is both yes, and we're not going far enough in our creativity. So one of the things I've tried to push, and 45Q is putting a value on incentivizing the beginning of the industry that learns how to grab carbon and sequester it. But we now see there's some amazing new, and this is all cutting edge stuff, new ways to grab that carbon and shove it in concrete, or shove it into a type of plastic, or shove it into building materials where it is sequestered for centuries. So it's not only, we've seen the breakthrough on how to capture. Now we need a version of the 45Q to also incentivize where to put it. And the 45Q that was always saying, okay, we'll capture lots of it and we'll shove it back in the ground and use it in enhanced oil recovery, fine. But it turns out if the direction of the technology is smaller, more compact, you can do it at more localized emitters. So over here you have a facility that's making concrete. The ability right there on site, because concrete is making it as a big emitter, capturing that CO2 and shove it right back into the concrete itself as it's poured into your neighborhood sidewalk. That's where the disruption needs to be. And it breaks my heart and just drives me insane around here that almost no one reads. There's amazing articles coming out about these technology breakthroughs, and we still sound like we're a decade out of date when we're doing legislation.
I think there's a side of environmentalists that are ignoring the carbon capture technology, and then there's a side that is optimistic but has some doubts, especially about ambient air capture. Even the people who are in favor of expanding carbon capture a lot worry that ambient air capture doesn't really have a market. There's no...
In some ways it doesn't, so that's actually part of what you're doing, particularly if you can do it at the point source. So I use the concrete because that's just an easy visual. But right there, you see there's a model that works and is being done in certain parts around the world. There's a couple places in Europe that have been doing it now for a year or two, and it seems to be working really well. But I'm going to ask you to take also a step backwards. So many of the policies of the current administration have been so bad. Some of the approaches on natural gas and the permitting and the regulations and the piping. The United States this year will use, about 17% more coal. We're now exporting lots of coal to Europe and other places around the world. So in 2021, the 1 year of left unified government, even if when you adjust for economy coming back, we've made the world dirtier. And it's because we did things to push up the price of natural gas rather dramatically. And so we took our cleanest fuel that actually provides also the ability to do things like the Allen cycle, where you can burn natural gas, produce electricity, and capture every bit of the CO2. Instead of moving that direction, the Biden administration's attack sort of on natural gas, we raised the price and we drove people back to using coal. It's like you wonder, do they have any economists that actually understand the technology opportunities and what happens when you raise the cost of our cleanest fuels?
So you mentioned sort of how natural gas can be burned without emitting carbon. A lot of that has to do with these carbon capture technologies.
Well, the ambient cycle, Allen cycle, the concept is, okay, you've blown up the gas. Why not use that superheated gas to turn another part of the turbine, and at that point capture it? I mean, but that's just one. There's lots of other things. We have a fascination in the office of how to get plastic out of the ocean. There's lots of things we environmentally care about. Okay, 90% of the plastic in the world's oceans come from 10 rivers. Go to those, 8 are in Asia, 2 are in Africa. Go to the 10 rivers and incentivize the value of that plastic. Instead, you see lots of charities and groups, we're going to go out in the ocean and collect. Well, first thing you should do is go to the 10 rivers where you know the sources are. But the charity model, the people that make money on it, those aren't necessarily incentivized to actually go to the point sources. But it's a lot more manageable if you go to the 10 rivers, 8 in Asia, 2 in Africa. And that's where 90% of the world's ocean plastics come from. I'm struggling to get people to think with a calculator in their brain instead of think with their emotions, because that calculator in the brain will make the economy, opportunity, growth, and the environment much better, and do it in a way where it doesn't have to be sort of a Malthusian future of living poor.
So how in the US can we work on an energy policy that is going to cut emissions? Because at the current rate, emissions are going to continue increasing, and the damages from climate change are going to outpace the benefits.
Okay, I think there's something wrong in the model of your question. We were actually cutting emissions at the same time having economic growth. I accept there's a bunch of pandemic noise in the data sets, and we're always having to adjust for that. We need to also get the Democrats in this current model to stop their war on all types of hydrocarbons, because the base load is the need. I mean, think about what's going on right now in the Northeast with this cold snap. The amount of fuel oil that's being burnt in New York liberal constituencies. The very people that elect some of the hard left are now the dirtiest emitters in the United States. For those of us in the West, we actually have this weird thing of, in the afternoons, our power, if you actually look at the futures market, the price goes to zero. We're producing so much photovoltaic. At the same time, we also kept our baseload nuclear in Arizona. So what do you do with that excess power? We're working on a project there where much of that excess power is going to be turned into hydrogen, and hydrogen becomes a battery. So sort of these grid dynamics, and it's fascinating. You know, I'll still get people that oppose the baseload nuclear. Well, take a look at the carbon impact of Germany right now. They got rid of their baseload nuclear, and they're dramatically dirtier than they were before. It's stopped letting sort of the emotional current environmental movements take the day and start doing the ones that actually are based on the facts and the math. And be willing to push that technology envelope. I mean, the iron air battery coming out of your part of the country you grew up in is, if it's true, we can do large utility grade batteries without rare earths, and it has, you know, a power cycle that's weeks. And the first ones will be rolled out, I think, by the end of this year at a utility grade. Some of the breakthrough is already here. Now, back to, like we were talking about 45Q, fix the tax code, fix the regulatory code, so there's a path for the disruptive technologies to become part of our everyday. And there's a perverse incentive around Capitol Hill that a lot of the groups that write checks, a lot of the groups that have technologies spend lots of time courting members of Congress, even when their technologies are already out of date.
And some would say that some of those technologies that are out of date are coal, fossil fuel.
I'm actually talking about certain types of photovoltaic, others where there's already been a leap beyond those. You look at some, like you talked, the Democrats' Build Back Better, which is really more of a social spending bill with lots of green expenditures in it. A lot of that money was actually going to technologies that have already been leaked. And that's my frustration. It's what happens when you do prescriptive spending, prescriptive committees that get to choose sending money to their friends. It's the same thing in the CHIPS Act or the China bill, those. You're empowering government to choose its friends instead of the technology that's most disruptive and effective to win.